Welcome to the podcast Above the Cloud, Stories from the Boardroom. In every episode, we interview business leaders who are navigating the complex world of B2B marketing. Whether you're trying to grow revenue, swoop into a new market, or launch new products, we promise you've landed in the right spot. And now your host, Richard Byrd.
All right. On today's episode of Above the Cloud, Stories from the Boardroom, we have Tom Millas. Tom is the VP of Brand and Communication at Schneider Electric. Welcome to the show, Tom.
Thank you so much for having me, Richard. Great to be here.
Yeah, well, we're really excited to have you on. Schneider is one of those companies that, I've always respected, and you guys are just such a massive company, and you do so many things. So I'll be really curious to hear what you got to say about the company and your background and how you got to where you are today. But one thing that we do is a tradition here on the show. Before we jump into the hard-hitting questions, we have the toughest question we'll ask all show, and that is, if Schneider Electric were a bird, what kind of bird would Schneider Electric be?
I would describe it, I'm going to go with a toucan for this one, and I thought about it a bit. And I think it's because a couple things. One is Schneider as a company and how I believe in Schneider, it is an impact company and a sustainability company at its core. And toucans also are very associated with the rainforest area that is also associated with sustainability. But more on personality-wise, toucans, although I don't have much experience with them myself, they are highly social birds and are very much a pack bird, as in they tend to be in packs, is my understanding. And I think Schneider as a company, and I've learned working in Schneider and being fortunate to be here, I've learned that the relationships matter, and being social and working with others and collaborating is one of, I think, the greatest parts of being in this company. And so I think toucan's going to be the one that I go with this.
I love it. Well, those are pretty cool looking birds. And
That's right.
If nothing else, you got a colorful beak. So
That's right.
I love it. That's great. Well, I've known you for a few years now, but for our audience, maybe tell a little bit about Schneider Electric that the people are not that familiar with them, or maybe some things that they might not know about Schneider Electric, and then maybe walk us through your career and how you wound up there.
You know, what I really have been always impressed with for Schneider is the ability to connect the outcome of what the energy and automation industries and industrial sectors are driving with core areas of what I would call transformation in the world around us. So what I mean by that is when you look at sustainability, efficiency, and you look at the concept of bringing digitalization and electrification together to be sustainable, that's really what Schneider does. And so rather than look at the company as a company that makes a bunch of different products, which of course Schneider does like many others, it is really a company that has a mission to be the partner for sustainability and efficiency, leveraging the entire portfolio of the company. And so whether that's hardware, software, solutions, different layers within that, and for all different types of industries, right? The name is Schneider Electric, but the industry served by Schneider is really pretty amazing. And so when I joined the company in my career, there were just so many amazing pieces to it that I've learned or I've gotten to know over time. For example, Schneider does a significant amount of work and has for a long time in the data center space. A lot of the electrical infrastructure surrounding it, the digitalization and the electrification of the different power supplies, and also things like cooling, for example, of data centers. A lot of the discussion today in the world is around the AI growth and the AI race, particularly in the US. And the discussion has largely been around the energy needed for it. And so Schneider is a company that is often thought of in that regard, but the relevance of data centers in terms of how they connect to AI growth, I would argue has never been greater. And so that's just one little area of what Schneider does and what Schneider is capable of doing that made me really excited to join the company. And when I joined Schneider was another chapter in my career, like we all have. I was very fortunate in as you mentioned, Richard, we've known each other for a while. I started my career way back in crisis and public relations is really what I started in. And I came out of school and primarily worked for GE at the time, General Electric, which at the time was a true conglomerate in every sort of the word,
Yeah.
and was everything from making dishwashers to nuclear reactors. And
Yeah.
I started in the nuclear reactor division, the nuclear energy
Wow.
business. And so I was really thrown into a world in which, as someone who went to school for public relations, international relations, I'm not a scientist or an engineer. And I had to really learn the ins and outs of it. So I'm very proud that I can still tell you how a nuclear reactor works, whether it's a pressurized water reactor, boiling water reactor, small modular reactor. I still remember it, and that was really my first learning of needing to become a domain expert in certain areas to then apply what I do in my role of leading communications and brand. And so over the years, I was extremely fortunate to have a number of roles. There were a number of leaders in GE who took a chance on me, and that is not lost on me. I'm privileged to be in a position today where I can support team members and bring them along as well, and hopefully give them great careers. But I was able to take on a variety of roles throughout communications and marketing. This was a time when we launched the first social media channels for parts of GE, right? We'd never done things like Twitter at the time. Facebook was still relatively new. There were lots of platforms that don't exist anymore too. RIP, things like Vine and Periscope, and I don't know, we can all name the ones that came and went or were acquired or merged or all that stuff, right? And so there were really some formative times for me in early in my career to build out what now I know is a more well-rounded communications career. The other part of my career that was very important to me was being able to do a job that was not fixated on one geography. I was always brought up to appreciate the world and different cultures, and it was a big part of who I am. And so I wanted jobs and actively took jobs to see the world. And so I was very fortunate. I think latest is I've been to over 90 countries, most of which are for work.
Wow.
Some of which I visited a lot, some of them only once or twice. But it gives you a perspective on the world, which has always carried with me. And why I continue to work in and around the energy industry is because, being someone who is American myself, we often do take energy for granted in this country. And we often just wake up and assume that the lights will turn on and everything's reliable and there won't be brownouts or blackouts. And, our energy bill will go up and down and we don't like it either way, right? We don't want to pay for energy, but we do. There are parts of the world where people don't have that. And we have to put all that in perspective and get the context of what we're trying to solve for throughout the world. And that's why I think communications has become a growing necessity for the energy industry to better explain what the industry does, but also know that there's a lot of work to still do. And it really does regionalize and localize in many different ways. So what is applicable for the US is not applicable for other parts of the world, and vice versa. And the priorities will shift and change. And so over the years, as I took on more roles, I was able to start leading departments and teams to help address that. I spent a number of years supporting different mergers and acquisitions, which was a lot of work in the brand space, as well as doing work in areas like distributed power, areas that were sort of qualified as emergency power generation. I spent a number of years doing instrumentation, sensors, this sort of area that isn't talked about as much, but all the connection points as the Internet of Things kind of took off to make sure that the energy industry becomes digitized. And so here we are, now in the mid 2020s, where no one's questioning that energy has been transforming, but the rate at which it transforms varies across the world. And in my role at Schneider Electric, I focus on the North America region, and we focus on brand and communications across North America, which is a fascinating time to be in this region. I think I say that every year, but it still is a fascinating time to be in it. And my background is sometimes a little bit more diversified in energy, in the sense that I've been fortunate to start in power generation, and then I spent a number of years in other aspects of energy like transmission and distribution, but then moved into the oil and gas space and the broader energy and chemicals markets, which is where I spent a number of years, particularly in the city of Houston, working for a Baker Hughes, which is an industrial energy technology company, but has a long history in things like oil field services and rotating equipment. And so I bring all that perspective in the sense that as we now look at the next transformation of energy, right? Everyone was talking, what was it, Richard, you know this more than me, 5 years ago, everyone was talking about net zero equipments for 2050, right? That was like the thing that everyone talked about. They're still there, right? It's not like we've gone away from that, but we all have started asking ourselves, okay, what do we do in the meantime, right? Like it's such a long fire goal. A former business leader that I worked with always used to sort of joke. He's like, all the people who are on stages at events saying we're going to be net zero by 2050 will either be retired or dead by 2050. And so, do they really have any skin in the game? And it's a very good question. It's like, who are the people actually who need to drive that? And it's largely the people who are only 10, maybe 20 years in their career, who have a long runway and are actually going to be responsible for making that happen. And so that was part of the reason why in my career, I also decided to take my next chapter and join Schneider, because the ability to decarbonize and the ability to electrify has moved from, in some places, a nice to have to a need to have, and in other cases, from a need to have to a must have in different areas. And so it's just a really fascinating time and a privilege to be a part of that at this phase of my career.
Man, that's a great way to sum up your career. And you touched on a lot of things there that I want to maybe circle back on. First off, Vine. How awesome was Vine? That was great.
It was a great concept. It was a great concept. What's even funnier now, and I'm sure I'm not the only one who's seen this, is that popular Vine clips have reappeared on TikTok as like a blast from the past. Like it's like a nostalgic thing. Then people have recorded these Vines either before they were taken down or otherwise deleted, and they're almost like having a second life. It's almost like watching some TV show from the 80s that's on at 2 in the morning. It's like a really interesting model. The saying, right, when you put something on the internet, it never really goes away. Like it's true, it doesn't.
Yeah, it's like it is warm. It's like watching Nick at Night. It's like see,
exactly.
I love it. But one of the things our podcast focus exclusively on people that are in technical, complex B2B environments, and it's certainly. Your career has always touched on that when you're talking about working in the nuclear energy space. It's amazing because you really do have to get in there and understand this technology, and it can be very challenging for somebody who was not educated we're not engineers and we didn't go through engineering school, and many people who are good at communications or didn't do so well in physics and chemistry and and all those things. So talk to me a little bit about that. Why how do you, because I think that is one of the things, when I first met you, I assumed that you were an engineer, and because you knew the technology so well.
It's a compliment for sure. Thank you. I never pretend to be one, but I maybe can pass as one. I don't know what the right way to say it is. I discovered, actually, to go all the way back to my high school days, I was struggling with what I wanted to do for a career, especially as sort of let's call it junior in high school, so around 16 years old or so. And the aha moment for me came actually when I was in advanced placement biology, AP Bio, and I was presenting on something that I was doing, and I think I got all the science parts wrong. I didn't do it right, whatever it was. And my professor, I remember, or teacher, I should say, her name was Dr. Gregory. I remember, I saw her years later. She came up to me after, and it was sort of like towards the end of the year. And, I think I ended up getting maybe a C+ or a B- or something in the class. And she said, Tom, you're really bad at bio. And I was like, thanks. I'm like, that's great. But she said, you're really good at speaking, and you're really good at presenting, and you're really good at writing. And she said, I would be remiss to tell you that you should think about a career in communications. And I give her a lot of credit for telling me that, because that actually started a sort of spark in me to say, okay, how do I do something with this? Because but it goes back to, I was interested in science, I just wasn't very good at it. And probably because I don't know, I just didn't have the patience for it. I'm still very much a person who works in gray space, black and white kind of isn't my thing all the time. I can work in it, but
Yeah.
naturally I tend to like gray space. And so, getting to know complex technical topics is not easy, but it is something that is needed, because the only way that as marketers and communicators and brand leaders, we can hope to accurately understand what a company is really innovating on and what it should be known for and what its value proposition is. You have to look, of course, externally at what the market demands and what customers are, but also what makes you different. And a lot of what makes you different is the people and the stuff that you innovate on. And that can be either a physical product that's manufactured, it could be a piece of software, it could be a service. Right. When I worked at Baker Hughes is a massive services arm for different areas of oil and gas and broader energy. And so I think it's on us as people who work in this industry of marketing, branding, executive leadership, to take the time to understand what it is we actually sell. And so I've been fortunate, even at Schneider Electric, right? I've been fortunate to be able to go already into several of our factories and really understand what we do there and how do we make it and what does it matter to the customer, right? It sounds kind of like an obvious question, but there are too many people in our field, I feel, that don't take the responsibility of saying, I need to understand what we actually sell, not just know the best marketing tactics or the best brand strategy, but actually know what it is we make, how it impacts our customers, and how it drives an outcome to them. And so I do think it is the responsibility of everyone to do that. I always go back to another aha moment I had early in my career, actually still in school. I interned at PepsiCo, and I lived in Dallas, the Dallas area, for a summer. And at the time, PepsiCo had I believe it was a requirement, if I remember correctly, where every employee had to do a ride along with a PepsiCo employee who worked on the front line. And it was amazing because you could really understand what someone went through who was, for example, a delivery driver for Kroger, the supermarket, right, which was a major customer. So that was that was my way of understanding it. That was my technical download. Like, wow, it is very difficult to understand. How do you do inventory? How do you bring all this stuff? You got to hit 10 grocery stores in one day. For someone who's in marketing or communications or branding, like that's not always what we know every day. But it was really fascinating, and I try at least to continue that in my career.
Well, one of the things you talked about there, Tom, that I thought also was interesting was you're talking about the different, you can't paint the globe the same way. And some energy sources are more important in other areas and of the world than they are in others. I was at a conference at the University of Houston a couple of weeks ago at the Carbon Management Institute, and they were talking about how in some parts of the world, in a lot of third world countries, the fuel that they use for cooking can be very bad for the environment and bad for the people who live there. And if they switch from kerosene or animal dung sometimes to natural gas, that would really improve their lifespan and be a lot better for the environment than the sources they're currently using. So it really was eye-opening to me. I've been exposed to a lot of things in the energy world, but I didn't realize that source was so bad, for the environment.
It is a really sometimes sobering notion of how different the needs are for different parts of the world. And going back to where we talked a little bit earlier, I've been fortunate enough to see a lot of the world with energy, and it is such a stark contrast within different countries, within different regions. But even within the U.S., I would argue there are very big changes, right? I mean, the variance in weather, temperature, humidity, the way in which cities are built, very different in places like the Northeast versus parts of the South, versus parts of the West Coast or the mountain ranges and things like that. And so we know a few things to be true, right? We know that generally speaking, electrification is an amazing path to sustainability. And we know that also the ability to measure everything from emissions to efficiency also is a path towards ultimately decarbonization. And there's an interesting mix. It's been around for a few years now. Many of us talked about it. The concept of the energy trilemma has been around now for a while. And we all know these industry terms come and go. Some of them stay for a while, some of them morph, some of them are replaced. But I particularly liked when that one started becoming a more of a normal vernacular, because you think about those legs of the energy trilemma, and affordability is a big one, right? And sustainability is another big one, but also the resiliency, reliability of energy, sometimes called energy security, of course, it depends on the context, is a really important one. And it goes back to cultural norms, right? If you look at the US, most of us in the US are unwilling to sacrifice convenience for something that is better for either affordability or sustainability or something else, right? Where you look at other parts of the world and that's not the case. And so we have to balance the right way. And we have to, Schneider, part of our purpose is we say we make the most of our customers' energy and resources, make the most of it. So what does the most mean, right? The most can mean reduce the amount of waste from energy. It can mean be the most efficient. It can mean be the most sustainable. It really depends on what the need is. And so it is not at least to use the American term, it's not a peanut butter approach of everything we have to do. We have to think about it in different ways. And in some of the parts of the world, you're right. I mean, moving from coal to gas, for example, or moving from some other form of fuel that maybe as basic to your point as a cooking fuel, in some parts of the world would be a step. Other places, the leap to a fully renewable system may make the most sense. But we have to make sure we balance the needs of what I truly believe is a modern society, which balances everything from convenience to security to affordability, with sustainability as an underpinning of all of it and also an outcome of all of it. And I think what's exciting about the industry right now is there is less and less, I would say, justification for thinking through sustainability as a requirement and a need and a competitive advantage.
Yeah.
To drive growth. It took us a while to get there. And again, we're never perfect, right? We all can admit that. But if I go back 10 years in my career, 15 years in my career, right, I remember the big topic was we had the production tax credit, the PTC for wind, for example, in the Obama administration, which then lasted and kind of faltered and came back. And, like a lot of, bills, it had its day, et cetera. And there was so much discussion at the time of all of us who can remember of, is wind really going to take off? What's the deal with solar? How do we integrate it? And then you look now at the US, and, the state with the most wind energy is Texas. And that has been the case now for a while. So it is interesting to understand the short-term needs and the ability to move from one fuel source to another for the ultimate goal of sustainability in the sense of decarbonization, but also sustainability in the sense of reducing the amount of waste in your system. And so that can mean a different form of energy for certain parts of the world, certain parts of end users, and certain industries.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think with these data centers coming on, you touched on that earlier, those are require a lot of energy. And I think we're going to need all of it. I think we're going to need it from wind. We're going to need it from solar. We're going to need it from natural gas and your old friends in the nuclear energy as well.
that was one that for those of us who have worked in the nuclear industry, it is fascinating to see. And I can't say I work directly in nuclear energy right now, but of course, it is an industry that's seen, like many, some wild swings in public perception over the years. And the understanding of it has gotten greater over the years, which is a good thing.
Yeah.
But also the evolution of the technology is one that shouldn't be taken for granted either, because the concept of a small modular reactor, for example, that's just one of course, a lot of technologies right now, was really kind of a pipe dream for a while. And not just necessarily with the technology, but the cost profile of it, just the amount of capital expenditure or otherwise capital had to be put up was sort of like unheard of. And then there just wasn't an understanding of it. And so we have to remember that a lot of times these industries have to play the long game of thinking through where energy is going to move to and what sources are most viable. And so it is, I will say I'm always a little bit selfishly happy that nuclear is having another kind of turn of it. And I think it is valuable. And I think it is an important part of looking at, again, the energy mix of what we need, particularly here in the US.
Man, we, speaking of nuclear, we have a client that's in the aerospace industry. We were at a conference and they were talking about colonizing the moon at this conference. And one of the things that they were talking about is they're going to need energy up there. And the thing that makes the most sense for those companies is for just having extended, having electricity on the moon is nuclear. And imagine, putting a small microgrid powered by nuclear on the moon. And you just think, wow, that's just like sci-fi. There's no way. And they say technically there's not a technological hurdle. It's a regulatory hurdle, because who's going to regulate the surface of the moon? and what jurisdiction does nuclear fall under on the moon? So I thought that was such a fascinating conversation. So talk to me a little bit about your day-to-day at Schneider. Tell me about your team. What do you guys do? What are you working on from a sales and marketing perspective there and brand?
So at Schneider, we have a very regionalized model in the sense of much of how we perceive the brand and enhance the brand. Of course, Schneider is a global company. We have amazing talent around the world. We know that our customer base, of course, wants to act and interact with Schneider at a very localized level. And so part of the company's, of course, mission and part of our values is we like to say we're the most local of global companies. And so I'm fortunate to lead the team for North America, which includes not just, of course, the US, but Canada, Mexico, Central America, to really think holistically about how do we enhance the reputation of the company, how do we protect it when we need to, but also how do we differentiate ourselves in the market, given that we always know that this market is a crowded one. And knowing that we've set up our team in, I would say, a fashion that is not unlike other companies, but with certain purposes, right? So, of course, our department for brand and communications includes external communications, which includes media relations, PR, as well as executive thought leadership. It includes brands. So, of course, we are the regional operational brand team. So we have, I always say, the luxury of taking what Schneider has developed globally and has been able to transcend across geographies, and in some cases personalize it for our market. In other cases, simply apply it to different end segments and end users. And so we work very integrated with, I would say, a very integrated approach with many of our marketing colleagues across North America, whether it's end segments and channels, different personas. We really act as one team. And so what we do on the brand side, though, more specifically, is really shape the narrative and the market leading narrative of what our region stands for. And that's something that, as always, we continuously look at. And so we handle the brand component in that sense. We also handle the internal communications of the region. So Schneider is a very diversified company from a regional footprint perspective. And we have a multi-hub approach, which is a way of saying we don't all sit on one campus and we don't all have the luxury of everyone drives through the same gate every day. But I would argue that's also not, it's actually a luxury for us not to have that as well, because we are able to have a diverse footprint in the US that allows us to be closer to our customers. And so Schneider has a little over 21,000 employees in the US. And so they sit across the country. We have several hub cities. I happen to sit in Nashville, where we have a very large operational center. And so we handle the narrative internally around our goals, our strategy, our ability to execute for customers, and the priorities of telling our story across this amazing region. And so it's been a really great experience, in my career, to be able to lead a few teams like this in some way. But what I particularly like about the work that we're doing today is connecting, even more than usual, the shifting sentiment of customers with how our employees have to shift their perceptions over time. And so sometimes you have customers can sometimes be like, oh, that's sales thing, right? Let them deal with the customers, and everyone else kind of sits in the background. But as we all know, customers shift their sentiment over time as to what they care about, what they value. And that continues to shift in the US, right? Customers are wanting to look at more affordable solutions, more efficient solutions, as underpinned, of course, by sustainability as sort of a non-negotiable in many ways. And so it's important that we as a team take the lead on working with our marketing colleagues, our business colleagues, to understand what the market's telling us and then internalize it and interpret it in a way that our employees can understand. And so we do a lot of work with that. We work a lot with our business strategy team, with our commercial operations team in managing that. And I love that the team is integrated between the external and the internal with brand too, because ultimately it all goes back to Schneider is still, like any company or most companies, it's still one logo that everyone sees. It's one company that people interact with. And so what we say and do externally and internally, as I would say, has to pass like a vibe check. It has to be, feeling like it's the same company. And it's easier said than done, right? Any large company will have many sites, will have various subsidiaries, will have everything from a joint venture to a different part of the company that maybe was integrated or maybe long-term. There's so many different things. And so we have the privilege of managing that. So our team is diversified in that regard. It's also diversified geographically. So I have team members across the region, which I always think is an advantage because we get different perspective. And I also actually think from a brand and comms perspective and marketing perspective, having too many team members in one location is actually a risk. And it's a risk in the sense of you do get a bit of groupthink too much sometimes. And also we live in a country where it is not a homogenous set of customers, right? I mean, what customers need in Texas, where, I used to live and I know you are, Richard, Texas is very different than Massachusetts. Massachusetts is very different than California. California is very different than Florida. And so from a marketing and communications perspective, it's actually somewhat almost more critical than other functions, I think, to have people based or at least have very good knowledge of those parts of the region so that you can really think through how something's going to be perceived when you roll it out, either internally or externally.
That is so interesting. What we see a lot is, companies, they will be centralized or they will be dispersed. It sounds like you guys are really managing it and doing both at the same time. That's fascinating to me.
Yeah. It's never the easiest thing to do when you are trying to drive, I would say, transformational change and try to be different. It's easy to be centralized, in my opinion, and all show up to the same place every day and just kind of do a mediocre job. But actually to move in a step change and be a market leader, the perceptions that you have to come from everywhere. And we are a country that, of course, is not slow. And therefore, even if you were to get on a plane and try to gain knowledge, living somewhere is different than visiting it. Working somewhere is different than being really integrated in a project. So it's just an interesting perspective I've learned over my career that I think when you have too much, certainly from a marketing perspective, too many people from similar backgrounds, you do tend to have, I would say, not as productive of a creative ability in your company.
Yeah, that, for sure. I think that is like you said, a diverse country like the United States, is, I think from a sales perspective, really think about it. If you're, and I think marketing will do this a lot when marketing is centralized. It's like, here's what we're going to talk about. And then you hear the salespeople pipe up and go, well, look, that's never going to play in my community. Or that's no one in my, we're really going to push these offerings. And they're like, well, nobody here wants those offerings. That might work over there, but that's not what my customers are asking us for. That does allow you to really, keep your finger on the pulse of what's going on with your customers. Tell me, so how long have you been in your role currently?
It's been about 7 months.
All right. 7 months. So what's one thing now that you wish you would have known on day one?
It's not a new learning per se, but it's one that I'm reminded of whenever I've taken a new role, which is the value of saying, I don't know, can you tell me or help me, is something that I think we all need to be reminded of. And it can be very easy to have imposter syndrome, as the term is known, when you start a new role and figure out, am I really right for this? But I would say generally, I learned probably too late in my career, to be honest with you, that I should be able to raise my hand and say, I don't know what we're talking about, or I don't know what this means. And I learned it eventually. But if I were to give like a much younger version of myself guidance, it's don't be afraid to say, I need to understand this better, or maybe I understand the concept, but it's not the same terminology as my last job or my upbringing or education or whatever it is. And I think that's a really key piece. And so every company, it's always sort of the running joke, right? Anytime someone joins a company, they say, we have so many acronyms, or, we're more complex than anyone else. It's like, well, if everyone's more complex than everyone else, then no one's really complex. And and so I think it's just a reminder, and I'm still doing it today, of learning what certain things mean. What does this mean versus that? Try to connect something in my current role to something I've learned in the past. Maybe it has to be looked at it through a different lens. So I think it's probably the biggest thing I've learned and continue to learn in any role, but it's reminded of me every time that there will be times where you feel like you don't know really anything that's going on, but there are people who would love to tell you about it as long as you ask. And, I would say for me, it goes all the way back again to when I started in the industry, and I had to have a nuclear physicist sit me down, I think in my second or third week on the job. And I said, I have no idea how any of this works. I couldn't tell you the first thing about nuclear reactors. And he said, let me draw something for you. And he spent 2 hours with me drawing essentially how nuclear fission works and going through that. And that's what we all need to have the courage to ask for and to help with, and to thank and show recognition for the people who do that, because that helps us all be better.
From a marketing perspective and communications perspective, what's the biggest obstacle you guys face at Schneider?
The biggest obstacle I would say we face is the ability to continually adapt as fast as the market needs us to. And I don't think it's unique to Schneider, but I would say that this is something that is probably plaguing most marketers today. And AI is definitely a part of it. I'm sure everyone, I don't want to talk ad nauseum about AI because I'm already sick of it, and it's not even that old yet. What I mean by that is it's like everyone has an opinion on it. And so I think it's more to the point of the cyclicality and the seasonality of what customers need is fundamentally moving at a faster rate than the energy industry overall is known to support, right? And so everything from manufacturing lead times, then trickling all the way down to someone buying a product and installing that product and operating that product or that solution, they're sort of at odds in some ways. And so there's not an easy fix, because one could argue that customers don't always know exactly what it is they need, and so they need help there. But being able to quickly pivot the portfolio to support a need, in some ways, I feel like marketing right now is becoming similar to the concept in the PR world known as newsjacking, which is essentially, some people would call this ambulance chasing, which I don't happen to like that term, but newsjacking is the concept of when something happens in the news that was unexpected, and there might be some way that you can insert your organization into the story to make your brand more relevant, whether it's, hey, we have a product that could solve for that, or, hey, we have an opinion on this, take advantage of it, right? And so for those who have worked in the PR industry, myself in past lives, agencies, of course, will help with this all the time. They'll say, hey, we just saw there was a story on this. What if we pitch this story in the news because it could be relevant for us, right? And marketing is a little more linear than that. It's a little more, I would argue, methodical, which is a good thing, by the way. But the world continues to say move faster and change faster. And so I think that's probably the biggest challenge that I see in the work I do, but generally I would say as the industry as a whole, is that the cycle times of everything from development of content or messaging to creative to the ability to push media into the market, right, is constantly being challenged to move faster. And so whatever tools or new ways of working we can do, we need to support. In fact, even today, I will say, I was talking with an intern on our team who we are very fortunate to be able to have interns each year at Schneider. And so we have an intern on our team. And one of the things I asked her to do is I said, I want you to challenge us pretty much every week on answering a basic question. Could AI do that? And could it do it better than what we're doing today?
Yeah.
Or faster or simpler. So whatever better means in this context, it can mean, it doesn't always have to mean the output is better, but maybe the process is better. Maybe the time spent is faster. And so I am very much looking forward to our intern coming to me because she happens to have some background in AI along with communications. And so I love people to challenge this and say, we might be our own worst enemy sometimes in moving as fast as the market needs, especially here in the US, where the market does fluctuate and in terms of customer demand. Maybe not as a macro picture, like in terms of growth and things like that, but within segments, within states, within localities, things are going to change really fast. So that to me is the biggest challenge, but also one that I actually think can be overcome if we really take the time and we really think differently about using both tools and also just thinking differently on how we do this.
Yeah, being able to respond, I think you're right. Because, marketing, you have to have some consistency in your message, and, you don't want to change your value propositions every day or claim a different differentiator every day or, these kinds of things, because you look like you're talking out both sides of your mouth. But at the same time, the market is moving so fast. And that's where I think marketing can really, did you see this? You probably saw it. The Coors cans where they responded to Shohei Ohtani had hit a home run, and it hit in the stands, and it hit this billboard that was Coors had sponsored, and it blacked out a whole quadrant, a whole square of the light. And so they had a black spot on their logo. And so they made these special cans that had the same black square on their cans. And I just thought, what a wonderful way to take that news and, celebrate this home run. It was like, it was some milestone number 2 home run. So to celebrate that, and then also just, from a marketer's perspective, you get the free publicity and we get to associate your brand to Shohei Ohtani, even though he didn't pay you, you'd have to pay him.
Exactly. I mean, another great example of that is, that example, by the way, if you think about even producing a can, whether it's temporary or permanent, that would be a physical manifestation of that. Like, that's a manufacturing change as much as it is a marketing change, right? And so it's not as simple as saying, oh, well, just put whatever it is, put a black dot on the can or whatever, the changes. The other one that always comes to mind for me is, I'm a huge fan of cars and I love the auto industry. It's just sort of a personal area of mine that I always like to look at from a marketing perspective. I've never worked in that industry, but it's fascinating to me how certain companies rise above and also don't rise above the trends. And I remember, I'm forgetting when it was now, probably about 10 years ago. I can't remember, maybe 8 years ago, when the artist Prince, when Prince passed away, there was, his famous song, Little Red Corvette. And GM took an ad out, maybe it was Chevy, but GM, of course, behind them, took a full page ad out. I think it was in the New York Times. I might be misquoting it. And that, there's a line in the song, Little Red Corvette, where it says, baby, you're much too fast. And so they had this ad that basically said, baby, that was much too fast, as in like you left us too early. And it was basically like a red Corvette with like a sort of black drape over it. And they did it in like a matter of, it was very fast. It was like within like 48 or 72 hours after he passed away. And it was just a really, those are those moments where you're like, this is really clever. And like, whether or not you like Chevy or not, it's like, it ties that together. So I am a big analogy person generally, and metaphor and examples. Like I like to look at how other industries have done it. And I think it goes back to this notion of, I've spent my career in pretty much all B2B industries, right? Business to business. I've not done a lot in consumer directly, although GE, when I worked there, of course, are consumer arms. But there's a lot of lessons that the B2B industry can take from B2C. There's also a lot that the B2C can take from B2B. But increasingly, which I think really started, honestly, with the rise of social media, and now we're roughly 20 years on from that, the B2B industry has to continually learn from the B2C industries how to be adaptive and flex and not think that every time they need to do a new ad or something, it has to be so thought out that you actually miss the opportunity. And again, that's just something that I always challenge myself and our team about, is to say, okay, we're never going to be as, the same as a very large B2C company who has, 50 products on your grocery store shelf. But how do we think like that a little bit more is really the way. And so it's always, if we can get 1% better every day, then ultimately we'll get there, right? That's kind of the way to think about it. So that's I always think of the Prince example, kind of like how you saw the one with Coors is my always.
Yeah, that is a great one. Of course, that song was definitely not about a Corvette.
Okay. Yeah, they didn't need to extrapolate. They focused on the fact that it was free advertising for their
Yeah, that is so good. And I think that that makes a brand more personal. I think, even whether you're a Prince fan or not, but who's really not a Prince fan, I guess. I don't want to know that person, but but yeah, I think get that emotional connection is so important. And I think B2B companies do lose sight of that a lot. I think B2B is certainly as emotional as any other as B2C, because at the end of the day, you're not really selling to a business. It's people selling to people, and they're making people make emotional decisions. AI hasn't taken that part over just yet. We'll see. When AI procurement happens, we'll maybe things will change at that point. But until then, you got to convince another person, and we're emotional beings. Well, I guess what would you say is the biggest misconception about your industry, Tom?
The biggest misconception, that there's been a few over my career, but I think that the biggest misconception right now, and I do think it's important to say right now because it can change, is that it's actually more from, I would say, a workforce perspective, that the energy industry is maybe a dated, or let's call it not modern industry in some ways. Because if you look at actually the numbers, and as any marketer will attest, right, the data is important, numbers don't lie in that sense.
Yeah.
The workforce has dramatically shifted in the energy space, right? In almost every company now in the US, the largest workforce generation is millennial, and the second largest is Gen X. The fourth is Gen Z, although it's of course third is Gen Z, and then fourth is the boomer generation, which is of course in most cases retiring, if not already. And so the reason why I bring that up is because actually, if you compare it to some other industries that people think might be more modern or different, the numbers actually don't tell that story. And what I'm getting at here is that we don't often think of energy as a tech industry. And the reality, though, is that it is. And there's so much technology in the industry. I have always a little bit of a reaction when I hear technology industry, because a lot of times people associate that with software industry. They don't make anything. The argument they make is not a physical product, which has its time and place, of course. But for people who want careers in technology, and actually even marketers who want to talk about technology, this is an industry that is super interesting. And also I think has a bigger connection to actually solving world problems than some other industries. And so that would be probably the biggest misconception, that I think one is that it's not a dated industry or tired industry. It's actually from simply a workforce perspective, actually from that perspective, it's pretty modern. But two, to have a career in technology, or from a marketing or communications angle to tell the story of technology, is always our biggest challenge, but also the biggest opportunity. And so that's why I've stayed in the industry so long, is I think that it's really interesting, right? I get more out of the challenge of sort of breaking misconceptions and changing perceptions about the industry than an industry that everyone is perfectly aware of. It doesn't need much work in that sense, right? So that's why I think right now, for someone who's either considering joining the industry or maybe might switch industries, there is a lot of work to be done in the marketing space and driving that perception change, because ultimately what many of us in the industry sell, either solutions, hardware, software, some combination thereof, it is all technology related, and it's less about the physical, is it metal, is it plastic, is it, 3D printed? It's less about the physical properties and the tech that is embedded within it. And that's, I think, super exciting, and one that I don't think we have even come close to really driving in a completely holistic way within the workforce, particularly the US.
Yeah, that that you really touched on it there. I think people don't think of the energy industry as being a particularly exciting industry, but when you do think about it, a lot of the biggest challenges in the world, energy could be an enabler for all those those industries, right? But it's the ultimate enabler for all that. If you don't have affordable, secure energy, as you're talking about the trilemma, I love that model as well. You're just not. It's going to affect every single other industry, from food to, how are we going to get this big AI revolution without energy? It's not going to happen. Well, so with that in mind, where do you see the industry going in the next 5 to 10 years?
I firmly believe that this industry is one where we've seen how the rise of renewable energy has started, whatever it's been now. I'm gonna say 30 years for the point of the argument, and that's, of course, folks will debate, of course, when it started and when it got big and all this stuff. But we know, to me, it's going to a place where an integrated energy ecosystem is the norm moving forward. And what I mean by that is there's no question anymore of we have to integrate renewables into an existing grid. At the same time, we have to balance the efficiency and the reliability and the affordability of any energy source together in a way that we've never done before. The part, though, that leads to is the rise of something that is talked about often in circles like Schneider Electric, which is the rise of the prosumer, or the producing consumer, meaning we are just now starting to see the scale of a consumer who can produce their own energy in some form and either use it for themselves, in some cases sell it back to a utility or a grid or some version, in other cases leverage it for other things, right? And that's the story that I don't think has been completely cracked yet, and for good reason, because again, these topics can take a while to grow, and you need to have examples, and they have to have support from many different parties. That, to me, is going to be where the intersection of the rise of electrification, right? Electric vehicles, right? We all know that's been growing, and it's had its ups and downs, right? If we look, and not so much my opinion, just the data shows us that electric vehicles continue to overall grow, but there are certainly hurdles with adoption and the rise of a prosumer environment where the consumer can actually produce their own energy, whether it's the sort of obvious example that everyone thinks of, which is not so much new anymore, is the solar panels on the roof of your house kind of thing, right? I mean, that's certainly, if you were to like think of one image, that's what a lot of people think of, but that's actually just one small part of it, right? It's being able to take energy from another source and conserve it, or use a battery storage system to replenish things. It's ultimately using electrification of your vehicles to power other things. That's where I think we're going to go. And then it's going to fundamentally alter the way the grid has to be used, and moving from a one-way connection to a two-way grid. And at Schneider Electric, we talk about this a lot, is this rise of a two-way grid, if we keep it that simple. And that we're not there yet, by the way, and of course, in most of the US, but the grid, hasn't really undergone that much of a shift in most cases our lifetimes, at least certainly not in a generation, that it's going to change that really fundamentally. So I think that's the most exciting part to me in the next 5 to 10 years, because what requires it to do that is significant digitalization, significant electrification, and also a significant understanding of, where does the power flow need to go, and how do we help do that in the context of growing economically in the US as well, and continuing to keep energy affordable for people. So that would be where I think that we're going, at least from certainly a thought leadership perspective and from a market shaping perspective.
Wow. So how are you guys preparing for that? Do you have, are you working on, do you see it as a technology shift on your behalf, or is it about a mind shift problem or issue? How are you guys seeing it?
It is definitely a mind shift. I would say, challenge, because a lot of the technology, and when I say a lot of, it's the majority of the technology does and can exist today. And so, like any technology adoption curve, we're seeing this be shorter and shorter with software cycles, but the ability to influence things like your home or the way in which you control energy is a slower process, and that's sort of by nature, right? Is that it's a little bit more complex. And so the one of the main ways we are preparing for it, and in many ways we've already done it, at least the first chapter of this story, is to make the story more front and center, make it more accessible, and also localize it. And so, telling the story of a two-way electrification project or a grid connection isn't something that you can really do it just like blanket approach across the US, because what you need in, again, a place like we'll go to where you're talking to me from in Texas, what you need in Texas and the way that you do that is so different than other states and vice versa. And so a lot of the preparation is actually the education, I would say, and the awareness and the ability for people to understand. When I say people, I mean both end user customers, but also organizations and those in leadership roles who influence it to be aware. That's probably the biggest focus that we are preparing for right now. And we continue to prepare for and continue to lead that dialogue in that space.
Isn't that the way it seems like less and less the big problems of the world are not as much technologically based as they are mindset based. I just see it so many times across the industry. People are like, oh no, we have the technology to do that today. We just have to prove that it's economical, or we have to prove that it's good for people, or they have to mentally accept this thing. And it's amazing that that's the case. In my mind, everything's a technological challenge going into it. And then the more you learn, you go, well, no, I wish it were that simple.
Yeah.
What are you guys doing today at Schneider Electric from a sales and marketing perspective? What kind of tactics are you guys using, and what seems to be working the best?
There's a number of really exciting areas of, I would say, collaboration in the marketing space that have come together, and I've been incredibly impressed since joining this company and being in the role that I'm in to have been a part of it. I think going back to my point earlier about the B2B experience has to match the B2C experience more and more is probably the best way to describe where we're looking in various ways at Schneider to make it more focused in that environment. Let me give you an example, right? Some of the very strategic ways in which our brand is expressed in the US is by design. For example, this was the first year that Schneider has entered into a partnership with the Boston Athletic Association to be the sustainability partner of the Boston Marathon, as well as other Boston running events. The Boston Athletic Association does several events of the year, like a 10K and a 5K, et cetera. And that is a multi-year partnership, and it's designed to create what ultimately the Boston Athletic Association wants, which is to make the Boston Marathon the most sustainable marathon in the world. And so that, from a marketing perspective, is of course important because we can put our name on stuff, right? Let's be very black and white about it, right? The sponsorship allows you to do that. Yeah. But that's not really the goal, right? The goal is not for people to just know who we are. It's know what we do and the impact we make and be able to personalize it to their world. And so I was super impressed, and I absolutely do not take most of the credit or any of the credit for this one this year, as I was so very new to the company, but being able to participate in the Boston Marathon myself. I was in Boston for the event, and being able to see the team come together and market the company in a way that, in my mind, very, very clearly mimics a B2C experience, right? We were alongside sponsors like Adidas, Bank of America, right? You can look up the named sponsors, of course, for the Boston Marathon. And being able to the team did an incredible job of matching the level of understanding that people had about energy and making it in a tone that was digestible for that audience. And so that's a lot of what you're going to keep seeing, is the ability for a B2B company to match a B2C experience in whatever way makes the most sense for that audience, right? And that's just one of them. So I think that's the standout example. And I'm certainly very proud of it myself to be a very small part of it. but it's a multi-year partnership, and yeah, I think you'll continue to see really great things as we go through the next few years now.
Isn't that that's such a great point you raise about that the B2C companies and the B2B companies are able to operate on a level playing field there, and don't you think that those experiential type of marketing is such a good way for B2B companies to engage with the public?
Absolutely. And even beyond the public, I mean, you said it earlier, like anyone who's in business is still a person, right? And so being able to engage at a person to person level is critical for B2B markets. And again, we don't claim, and I don't certainly claim that everything is amazing and perfect, and it never will be, but it's a journey, it's a transformation where in the past, and even in my own career, right, as recent as 5 or 7 years ago, there was even more separation between the B2B and B2C world. And, one of the biggest areas that's driving that, of course, is e-commerce, which is nothing new, but it is still somewhat new to parts of the B2B world. And there is a reckoning very much in much of the B2B world where customers increasingly expect us to be as efficient as a B2C company in our purchasing and the way that we sell our products. And we're seeing that all in other industries as well, right? I mean, this is the first time, for example, I purchased a new home earlier this year, and I had to have the home painted inside. All of like the walls were the wrong color when we moved in. And I was living in a different city at the time. And so I was not able to be at the house, and I needed to find a painter. And for various reasons, I didn't have any recommendations. So I went on a bunch of different apps. I think Thumbtack, what was Angie's List? They changed the name now, but a few different others. And I really was like, this is in some ways a B2B transaction in the sense that you're not really buying a product. You're kind of sussing out how a painter works and what they offer. And, ultimately it's their business. It's a little bit different. But I ultimately went with a painter just because the guy got back to me faster. He texted me instead of called me. And he said, I'll FaceTime you every day with what it looks like because that's just how I work. And I was like, perfect. Great. And another one who said they had to call me and do an hour-long call. I'm like, I don't have time for that. They had another one who said that they only took checks. And I'm like, this isn't 1980. I can't do that. And so the concept is we're already seeing this in industries that were maybe also historically thought of as more dated in the way that they did commerce, right? Like a painter or a plumber used to be, you might find the name in the yellow pages or you might do that kind of thing. So it's just everything's changing where we have to start matching that. And so just, again, making the incremental changes is what a lot of what we focus on to get there and make sure that we can differentiate ourselves from a customer experience perspective.
Yeah, I like that. He digitized his business and he made it easy for you to buy from him. And
he won my business and there we go. It was literally that simple. But I mean, imagine if he didn't do that, or there were others who lost my business, and that was just one transaction. I mean, you multiply that across a B2B company, and it really has quite a large impact.
Yeah, and that component that he added, the service of showing you a video footage of how it was working out, that's a really, he reduced your risk, right? Exactly. They're like, oh no, he's not paying you.
Yeah, the barrier to entry was certainly lowered in the sense that he was able to connect in a way that was more human, actually, even though ironically there was no phone call. I've never spoken to him. I've never had a call with him. I've just texted. Wow. And, I had cameras in my house and I knew he was there, and I gave him, there was a, keypad on the door, and that was the way it worked. And I sent him a text after it. I said, this was great. Thank you so much. Gave him a good review, and I'd recommend it to anyone. And so that, while maybe some people aren't that comfortable with the digital way of doing e-commerce, because I do actually kind of view it as e-commerce in kind of a different way, that trend is going to continue. And so that, again, is like the North Star of where, as marketers and as brand leaders, we have to think about on a regular basis.
Absolutely. Along those lines, what do you see as emerging trends in the marketing and industry?
The biggest emerging trend is, I'm going to say, is a sort of a subfacet of AI, because I think saying AI is too broad. generally speaking.
Sure.
The ability to reduce the versions, or let's call it lack of, I'm going to call it proper tone in marketing, right? So AI is wonderful in many ways. All of us are trying it out. In many cases, we've been using it. Some companies are further than others in marketing. But within AI, what I think you can really dig into and actually reduce so much work is the ability to fix things like tone and sentiment and fact checking as much as possible, right? In my career, for those who have been like myself, who started in the PR world, right? I mean, people remember clipbooks, which is, what you had to put together when you had to do a media coverage report. You have to originally had to step out clippings, right? And then it became a digital clipbook. But that's all now past us. We do that all digitally now. Well, AI in sort of a similar way, imagine doing like tone analysis, sentiment analysis with AI. It saves so much time. And then you take that and you feed in the next level, which to me are things like keynote speech writing, briefings, talking points. We're starting to play around with some tools there in a much more formalized way, piloting it first. And I give Schneider a lot of credit for thinking through pilots and the ability to do that. But things like, rather than start from scratch with a keynote speech, or when let's say a leader is getting a script from you, and so you write them a speech for some event, and then they go way off script live, right? That always happens, right? Someone they have some tangent they want to go on. Rather than try to write it down verbatim or figure it out or say, how do I capture some of that? As long as you got an audio recording or a video clip or something, you can feed it into an AI and say, compare this version with what I wrote, and then reconcile it to get one that's more accurate. I mean, that was such a manual process before, so manual. And so that's going to free up just an amazing amount of time. And that to me that's just one example of speech writing. There's also examples of, customer A/B testing with marketing and paid media. There's web traffic trends. There's so much, but I think the ability to data crunch and reconcile where you have things that used to be manual labor is the thing, because you said earlier, you're not a process person, right, Richard? Like a lot of us in marketing, myself included, I don't tend to be a process person by design. I've forced myself to learn it, and I see the value of it, of course. But case in point, I don't have a routine every morning when I wake up. I'm not a process person. Sometimes I wake up and I'll read news first. Sometimes I'll go get coffee. I just generally don't like a routine. And so what the ability of AI to do is actually the ability to put some routine in and make us more efficient for a function that is at least less routine oriented than other functions like engineering or finance or something like that, right? So that's a big opportunity, particularly for those who are the creative side of marketing, to be able to use AI to help reconcile versions, figure out, a way to do it where you don't have to have such a long process, and reduce manual labor to free up their headspace for the big creative, really impactful things. That's where I think is a huge area that I'm really excited about, that I can't say I've been excited about for that long until recently when I started seeing some of the real potential there.
Yeah, that's something that's really helped us a lot is for our clients, we'll buy a private GPT and we'll load their style guidelines, all those kinds of things in there, because we have to keep up with a lot of different companies' style guidelines, and most of them are very picky about that, and we don't want something to come back off brand to them. And so we run it through there and say, hey, we'll take our writing and roll it through there and say, hey, does this fit the style of that company, or make it fit the style of the brand's tone and voice of this company. And it does an amazing job. Many times I'm very disappointed with technologies and go, well, it was not as good as I was hoping for, but it really exceeds my expectations in a lot of regards. Or we'll upload technical documents and say, well, what was the heat temperature rating of this? And it knows it. You don't have to go and read all that stuff and try to commit these key details to memory, which is impossible, right? It's just too much. And that's exactly what AI is great at.
Yeah, totally.
From a marketing or sales perspective, what would you say is the biggest lesson you've learned in your career?
The biggest lesson I've learned in my career is the importance of data and proving the value of marketing through data, which sounds very obvious to many marketers, but I'm going to speak for the people in the room who come from more of a communications background, or maybe less of a, let's call it direct marketing or lead generation background, where it is not as intuitive to use data in the way that marketing can today. And so I am constantly challenged in my own psyche and by others to say, show me the data behind what you're doing. Show me the way that this connects to things. I think showing business outcomes is something I've learned for a long time, and say, okay, as a result of this, we've helped drive, X, Y, Z things. But the actual data and the ability to back up your gut with data is really important, so that ultimately you can stand on your own. And I think that's a key part, because with so much of the world we live in today, whether it's the whole fake news industry, whether it's the proliferation of AI related materials, right? I mean, everyone's seen, when we're recording this, at least, was it a few weeks back, Google released the new VO3 AI video creator, which is like incredible. And it takes deep, sort of deep fake videos to sort of an odd level in some ways. It's important that we still stick to the data showed this, and therefore we're making this decision as a result, right?
Yeah.
And I'm always constantly reminded of that and challenged to find new ways to do it. So I think that's one area that is, we all try to learn in our careers, and it's always an area for me that is one that I want to keep learning in and learn from others who have done it better than me, and there are many more who've done it better than me.
I really think you're right. There's just no shortage of shiny toys, but why are you using them? I think marketers are very prone to that, myself included. I love shiny objects. I cannot help it. What advice would you give a young person just starting out in marketing or communications?
The advice that I would give, I'm going to say myself as a young person, but anyone in marketing who has started a career, is the context matters a lot more than you think in what you do. What I mean by that is the saying that I often have for our team is be the best read team in the room, meaning know what's going on in the world, know how people are talking outside of the company. Don't get too shuttered into the bubble that is a corporation. Every company has an issue with this in some way, right? Either you have a very internally focused culture where you're maybe very engineering focused, and you have to kind of stay in your bubble because of either confidentiality or because of the way you work. And it can be very easy to just get in that bubble and not think outside. Other companies that have a different model may not think enough about cultural norms or things like that. Or they might focus too much on sales or trying to get the customer to wait. And the truth lies somewhere in the middle of all this, where, especially early in your career, it's the people who can talk with those who are at a higher level than them, VP level, SVP, and be able to relate to things going on in the world that aren't their direct role, that are going to have a more fruitful career, right? And so, coming out of school for myself, it was always said, make sure to read the paper every day and all this stuff. And of course, the internet was around, but the lesson is there in the sense that it doesn't have to be reading a newspaper every day, just to be clear. I think that's actually kind of a naive thing to say for particularly those who are young in their careers. If you get your news on TikTok, that's fine, but make sure that you have a variety of news on TikTok, right? Similar to if you want to get your news on X, make sure that you follow people that you love and you hate. That's a really, really critical point that I think is not talked about enough. And, it's something that I learned where, wisdom takes time to know, and I'm certainly not there in my career yet. But I will say that I'm wiser than I was when I was young in my career. But I had some great mentors who really challenged me to think differently about the world. And the way that you do that is you have to kind of take it on yourself to learn about topics you don't like. I had one amazing leader earlier in my career who had this trick. She was someone who traveled very often for the job, right? She was on a plane probably every other week. And this was, maybe I'm dating myself a little bit, but there were still a lot of magazines being printed at the time in airports, right?
Yeah.
Nowadays, I feel like it's just mostly tabloids and maybe a couple things, but there were a lot of magazines, and she made a point to buy a magazine every time she flew to an airport that was on a topic she either hated or knew nothing about.
Wow.
And so, for example, the example she gave was she said, I love gardening. And so I never buy a gardening magazine. She said, she told me when I once saw her, she said, I think so the magazine she bought was actually about the hunting industry. Like it was like something about hunting. And the reason why she bought it was because she wanted to gain a different perspective and understand there's this whole world of people who care about this that I won't run into in my day to day, just given the nature of my work, my job, my family, where I live, whatever it is. And I think it's such a great lesson. Like I try to really embody that when I can. And so I tell everyone on my team, and I tell people I work with, I still scroll social media on things that I don't like all the time. Like I want to get the perspective and understand it, because then it makes you that much more effective as someone who could be in a room and understand perspectives and be able to connect the dots. So that would be my lesson, is whatever your version is of gathering context of what's going on in the world and other parts of the world or parts of the place you live or the market you serve, make sure that you take the time to do that, and make sure that you take the time to look at a perspective different than your own, because it can be applicable to the marketing work you have to do without you always knowing it.
That is wonderful advice. I'm going to take you up on that advice. That's great. We got, I think about it, and this country is so divided on so many things. And I think people surround themselves with echo chambers of people think like they do.
I mean, good luck finding enough magazines these days for it. You can do some version of it. Is the takeaway. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think that if you do just surround yourself with the stuff that you already know about or whatever, or the logical theory of, or it's not a theory, it's a phenomenon of confirmation bias.
Yeah.
People are so prone to that. And you could see a news report and you ask one person with a certain mindset what the takeaway from that article is, and they'll come up with something completely different than another person with a different bias.
One of the great lessons or maybe teachings that some folks go through if they start in the PR industry is if you critically analyze media coverage. And I think it's applicable for any marketer, by the way. And I've learned so many lessons from let's call them more traditional marketers that I applied it to my original area of PR. But if I take one thing that I learned in college, I went to Syracuse University for undergrad, and I had a class where this was part of it. It's always, don't read a story for what's in it. Look what's not in the story. Like, what isn't being talked about? So for every one person that's quoted in a media story, who wasn't quoted, right? Is there only one side of the story being presented? What could have made the story more interesting or different? I always like looking at the data that's presented in marketing literature, right? So if let's say there was a publication that said something like, let's say it's about AI, right? Since that's a topic that everyone talks about now. There's a topic that says 30% of executives think that AI will replace their team's jobs. My mind immediately goes to, so does that mean 70% means that they don't think it will, right? Which actually is more impactful in some ways. Or like what is that? It's actually a minority. Like 30% is not the biggest. So, I always look at it that way, and I'm like, what isn't being talked about? And like, it's not necessarily that anything is wrong or incorrect, but it's the way it's perceived is a brilliant way sometimes to look at how you can fill the gap in differentiating your company or your marketing if no one's talking about that area or you have a space to fill. That's something that I think from a communications perspective can be learned and be used across marketing.
Oh man, that is great. That is a great advice, Tom. Well, what have we not talked about today? We touched on a lot of the subjects, from AI to the news run to technology. What have we not talked about that we should have spoken about?
The one area that I think is really critical for leaders growing up in companies today, both in-house and on agency or other sides, is the ability to be adaptable and the ability to understand that there is almost no industry today or organization where the job that you are hired for stays the same forever. And it is a harsh learning for those who really like consistency in not just their jobs, but their lives. But things change often, and to be able to advance in your career in whatever that means, right? Because not everyone has the same definition of advancement. You have to be just prepared that there will be things that swing, and you have to be comfortable with that. And I think it's the hallmark of a good marketing professional to be able to adapt to that, but also to be able to say, it is actually not if someone takes something away or changes something related to what you do, it actually can be looked at as a good thing because you're being given something else to try. And sometimes I think we can be too territorial with what we do. And at the same time, we don't always collaborate enough. And I'm as victim to this as anyone else. And so I would just recommend to anyone who is younger in their career or anyone who is struggling in their career, and I had this struggle myself, is that you have to keep reminding yourself that feedback is a good thing. Adaptability is the only way that you can really get ahead. And that if you are expecting that everything's going to stay the same forever, that's not going to change no matter what company you go to. Generally, it just isn't the case. And so you own your own career and your own destiny. I'll end with this point of when I started my career at GE, it was a company that had an amazing runway of executives and leaders, and no one ever really left. I mean, you were there for your whole career, and it was sort of I want to be clear, it wasn't a description of GE Jet specifically. It's actually more of that chapter of, I think, corporate America starting to close, which was the end of the era of pension programs, which most companies don't have anymore, or at least they've been phased down in some ways in the US. And the notion of company loyalty, I would say since the 2008 recession in particular, has completely gone out the window, because there is a need for you to take charge of your career and know that your company is there to support your career, but also you have to advocate for yourself. And that's a key part of any marketer's role as well, is advocating for the work that you do, but also be comfortable adjusting and having those changes is something that I continually need to learn myself. And so I encourage everyone else to do the same thing as well.
Yeah, I think that's happening across a lot of industries now, but I think that's really been evident in marketing for a long time. I really feel like you need to be a lifelong. I think about my career when I came in, the industry was just digitizing. So I was like the young guy who knew how to use Photoshop. And all the old art directors like, hey, come over here. Can you do this for me? Can you do this for me? And so I had all this work to do. It was amazing, right? And because people were still drawing on boards and cutting Ruby Lith and all that good stuff. And so it was really, and then I think about how the internet came, and then, how that affected the way we did websites were a whole new thing that we all had to figure out. And then when the smartphone came out, then everything went, to apps and mobile, and all these different progressions that have come. I just see AI as another wave that's coming in and disrupting things, and you just really have to be on your toes in this industry for sure. But now I think it's hitting a lot of other industries too. But if you're not a lifelong learner in this industry, you're not going to go very far.
That's right.
Well, Tom, thanks for your time today. It was really enlightening conversation. It's cool to see all the great things you guys are doing over here at Schneider Electric. If people want to reach out to you, where can they find you?
I'm usually pretty easy to reach. Hopefully, I'm on LinkedIn very easily. My name, Tom Millas. Happy to connect with folks. And I do think that there's a community in marketing and the communications world, which is really not that big, right? It is amazing how, and I know we all say this, but as your career progresses, like the world definitely does seem to shrink quite a lot. And so, tools like LinkedIn, I prefer because it's a great way to just see where everyone's moving, what they're doing, but feel free to reach out to me there. And I really look forward to listening to all the other episodes as they come out. Richard, thank you for having me. It's been a great discussion. And I'm wishing you all the best, of course. And I'll have to see you the next time I'm in Texas.
All right. All the best, Tom. I'll take you up on that. We can go get some good Vietnamese food.
Sounds good.
All right, take care.
That's a wrap on today's episode. If you enjoyed it, consider subscribing, sharing, or spreading the news about us on your favorite channel. Thank you for tuning into Above the Clouds, Stories from the Boardroom. Until next time, stay above the clouds.